The prisoner's plea. The dust of Nexus Station had a particular smell to it. Recycled air with undertones of industrial lubricant and the faint copper tang of desperation. Lyra Nix wrinkled her nasal ridges as she walked through the detention sector, her scaled tail sweeping behind her in a controlled rhythm that betrayed none of her inner discomfort. "This way, Ambassador," said Warden Tellis, a portly human who seemed perpetually damp with nervous sweat. "Though I must express my concerns about your insistence on touring this particular section. These prisoners are not diplomatic material." The station's artificial lighting cast harsh shadows across the metal grating beneath her feet. As a representative of the Christian Royal Council, Lyra had certain obligations. Inspecting the conditions of any facility housing sentient beings within shared space was one of them. "The Christian Accord guarantees basic rights to all sentient beings regardless of their crimes, Warden," Lyra replied, her translator converting her native sibilant speech into the human's language. "My visit is merely procedural." They approached a containment field that shimmered with blue energy. Unlike the other cells they had passed, this one was positioned in isolation, its occupant visible to anyone passing by. A punishment of public humiliation added to the physical confinement. Inside sat a human male, his back against the far wall, head lowered. Even from several meters away, Lyra could see the restraint cuffs on his wrists and the way his once standard-issue military fatigues hung loosely on his frame. "Who is this one?" Lyra asked, pausing before the cell. Warden Tellis consulted his datapad with a grimace. "Eli Blackwood, former fleet captain, responsible for attacks on 3 civilian trading vessels in the Korik sector. Killed 15 crew members." Lyra studied the prisoner more carefully. "And the evidence?" "He was found aboard his vessel near the wreckage, Ambassador. Weapon systems recently fired. Open and closed case." Something didn't seem right. The prisoner's posture wasn't that of defiance or aggression. It spoke of resignation, of a being who had given up fighting against a tide too powerful to resist. "Has he spoken in his defense?" Lyra asked. "Hasn't said a word since we brought him in 2 months ago. Circuit judge arrives next week. Execution's all but certain." Lyra stepped closer to the energy field. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. The prisoner lifted his head slowly, and Lyra found herself caught in the gaze of the most remarkable eyes she had ever seen. Deep amber, like the sacred stones of her homeworld, holding a pain and dignity that resonated with something deep within her. "May I speak with him, alone?" Lyra asked, not breaking eye contact with the prisoner. "Ambassador, that's highly irregular." "As is keeping a being on display like an exhibit," Lyra interrupted, her tail swishing once in irritation. 5 minutes, Warden." When the warden reluctantly stepped away, Lyra moved closer to the field. "Mr. Blackwood, I am Lyra Nix of the Christian Royal Council. I sense you are not what they claim." The man's eyes widened slightly, the first reaction he'd shown. "I have authority to invoke the Christian right of sanctuary," she continued, reaching for the ceremonial stone pendant that hung between her collar ridges. "But I need your consent." Eli Blackwood's brow furrowed in confusion. "Under our laws, I can claim responsibility for you through a bonding contract," Lyra explained, her voice dropping to ensure only he could hear. "It would mean your release into my custody." Understanding dawned in those amber eyes, followed by suspicion. His lips parted, and in a voice rough from disuse, he whispered, "Why would you help me?" "Because I've seen eyes like yours before," Lyra replied honestly. "Not the eyes of a killer, but of someone who has been betrayed by the system they served." Before he could respond, she turned and called for Warden Tellis. As the man approached, Lyra removed her bonding stone, the last gift from her clutch mother before the elder's passing. "Warden, I am invoking the Christian right of sanctuary and claiming this prisoner as my bonded mate," she announced, her voice carrying through the detention block, drawing the attention of guards and other officials. "You can't be serious," Tellis sputtered. "I am entirely serious," Lyra replied, holding up the glimmering stone. "This prisoner will be released into my custody immediately, or you will face a diplomatic incident with the Christian Dominion." As murmurs spread through the gathered personnel, Lyra turned back to Eli Blackwood, who stared at her with astonishment. "Well, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her translator unable to convey the nervous flutter in her native voice. "Do you accept my proposal?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the galaxy itself. Exodus to Sanctuary. The silence in the detention block broke when Eli Blackwood slowly rose to his feet. Despite months of captivity, he moved with a fluid grace that spoke of military training and inner strength. "I accept," he said, his voice stronger now, carrying an authority that made even Warden Tellis take a half-step back. The next few hours passed in a blur of bureaucratic resistance and diplomatic pressure. Lyra stood firm against every objection, every delay tactic the station authorities attempted. By station evening cycle, she found herself walking toward her docked vessel with Eli Blackwood at her side, still wearing restraint cuffs despite her repeated demands for their removal. "They'll come off when you're beyond Nexus space," Commander Reeves had insisted, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "Those are my terms, Ambassador." Now they walked in silence, flanked by security personnel who maintained a wary distance. Lyra noticed how Eli kept his movements deliberate and non-threatening, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "That's your ship?" Eli asked as they approached a sleek Crestian vessel, its organic curves standing out among the angular human crafts in the docking bay. "The Serapis," Lyra confirmed. "Small but fast and well-shielded." Eli studied the vessel with the practiced eye of someone who understood spacecraft. "Vortex-class diplomatic courier. Impressive." They boarded amid whispers and stares from station personnel. Once inside, the ship's environmental systems adjusted automatically, creating a comfortable balance between human and Crestian atmospheric preferences. Lyra directed Eli to the passenger quarters. "These will be yours," she said, gesturing to a small but well-appointed cabin. "I'll be in the pilot's chamber preparing for departure." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Why did you really do this?" Eli asked, holding up his still-bound wrists. "What do you want from me?" Lyra's tail swished once, betraying her discomfort with his directness. "Justice," she answered simply. "The station surveillance records show your ship was disabled before the trading vessels were attacked." "You were unconscious when a shuttle docked with your vessel." Eli's face registered shock. "How did you—" "Crestian encryption protocols are superior to those of Nexus Station," she replied with the faintest quirk of her scaled lips. "I accessed the records before making my decision." "They told me all footage was destroyed in the attack," Eli said, his voice hollow. "A convenient lie." Lyra moved closer, examining the restraint cuffs. "These first," she said, producing a small device from her diplomatic pouch. With precise movements, she deactivated the cuffs, which fell to the deck with a satisfying clank. Eli rubbed his wrists, looking at her with new appreciation. "Thank you. Rest," she advised. "We have a long journey ahead." Several hours later, with Nexus Station shrinking behind them, Lyra found Eli in the ship's small galley, preparing a meal from their supplies. He had showered and found clean clothing in the cabin's storage unit, simple garments that nonetheless fit him well enough. "You're familiar with Crestian food preparation," she observed. 8 years in the fleet," Eli replied, efficiently chopping a root vegetable. "Served with Crestians on 3 different assignments." He glanced up. "You didn't ask about my record?" "I didn't need to." Lyra settled at the small table. "Captain Eli Blackwood, decorated officer, specialized in security operations. Last assignment, investigating supply chain disruptions in the Choric sector." "You've done your research." "I prefer knowing who I've legally bound myself to." A silence fell between them. Not uncomfortable, but filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Eli placed 2 bowls on the table and sat across from her. "The attack," he said quietly. "I was tracking illegal weapons shipments. Someone in Fleet Command was involved. I got too close." He met her eyes. "They killed those people and framed me because I wouldn't be bought." Lyra nodded. "I suspected as much. The timing of your arrest coincided with significant military contract awards to Helix Corporation." "You've pieced together in days what I couldn't prove in months," Eli said. a hint of admiration in his voice. Diplomatic access has its advantages. Lyra tasted the meal he had prepared, surprised by how well he had balanced the flavors for both their species. This is quite good. Small talents picked up along the way. Eli's expression grew serious. Where are we going? A small moon in the Viridia system. I've held claim to it for several years now. It's technically within Crestian space, but far from the central planets. Remote. Safe. For now, Eli added, his expression darkening. Whoever framed me won't simply forget I exist. Lyra's tail curved thoughtfully behind her chair. Then we'll need to prepare. As they finished their meal, Lyra caught Eli studying her, not with the disgust or clinic. Building trust. The Viridia moon hung in space like a blue-green jewel, wreathed in wispy clouds that glowed silver in the light of its parent gas giant. As the Serapis began its descent, Eli leaned closer to the viewport, taking in the sight of forests that shimmered with an almost metallic quality and mountain ranges that curved like the spine of some enormous beast. It's beautiful, he said, genuine wonder in his voice. Sanctuary, Lyra replied, skillfully guiding their vessel through the moon's atmosphere. I claimed it 5 standard years ago when it was considered uninhabitable. Uninhabitable? Eli raised an eyebrow. It looks lush. For humans, perhaps. The atmospheric composition was initially toxic to most oxygen breathers. Her scaled hands moved confidently across the controls. I've been terraforming small sections. The area around my settlement is safe for both our physiologies. Now, they landed in a clearing beside a structure that blended organic and technological elements, clearly Crestian in design but adapted to the local environment. Around it, partial foundations suggested plans for expansion that had yet to be realized. Home, Lyra said simply, powering down the ship's systems. Not what you're used to, I imagine. I've spent the last 3 months in a cell with nothing but a waste reclamation unit and a hard bench, Eli replied with a wry smile. This is paradise by comparison. The first days established a cautious rhythm between them. Lyra showed Eli the boundaries of the safe zone she had created, beyond which they would need breathing apparatus. They worked together to expand the habitat, Eli's engineering background proving invaluable as they reinforced the structure against the moon's occasional seismic tremors. A week into their new arrangement, Eli was securing support beams when he noticed Lyra watching him from the doorway, her head tilted slightly in a gesture he had come to recognize as curiosity. Something wrong? He asked, wiping sweat from his brow. You're different from other humans I've known, she said, approaching with a canteen of water. Most would be demanding transport to the nearest human outpost by now. Eli accepted the water with a nod of thanks. Most humans haven't had their own government frame them for mass murder. He took a long drink. Besides, I'm still trying to figure out what your angle is in all this. Lyra's tail twitched, a sign of mild irritation he was learning to read. Must I have an angle? Everyone does. Eli set down the canteen. Even altruists. She regarded him for a moment, then gestured for him to follow her outside. The twin moons of the gas giant were rising, bathing the clearing in ethereal light that made Lyra's scales shimmer with iridescent patterns. My clutch sisters all bonded with politicians and military leaders, she said, gazing up at the sky. Strategic unions to strengthen our house's position. I was expected to do the same. But you didn't, Eli prompted when she fell silent. I chose diplomatic service on the frontier instead. My final act of rebellion. A sound emerged from her that Eli realized was a laugh, musical and light. When I claimed this moon, it was my declaration of independence. And now you've tied yourself to a human fugitive. Eli shook his head. Not much of an improvement. Perhaps not, she conceded, but it was my choice. The first bonding in generations of my line based on principle rather than advantage. Something shifted between them in that moment, a new understanding that lingered in the air like the scent of the strange flowering, vines that grew around the settlement. The next morning brought their first true challenge, A violent storm swept across the region, testing the structural integrity of their shelter. As wind howled and rain lashed against the transparent dome of the main living space, a support beam groaned ominously. "It won't hold!" Eli shouted over the noise. "The reinforcement polymer hasn't fully cured?" Lyra raced to the environmental control unit. "We need to seal the secondary chambers and focus shield power on the main dome." Working together, they rerouted power and braced the weakest sections. When a flying debris punctured the outer layer of the dome, Eli didn't hesitate. He rushed to patch the breach, exposing himself to the elements. Lyra pulled him back inside just as the automated repair system engaged. "That was foolish," she admonished, examining a cut on his forearm where debris had sliced through his sleeve. "It worked, didn't it?" Eli winced as she applied a healing compound to the wound. "You could have been seriously injured." Her touch was surprisingly gentle, clawed fingers careful against his skin. "I've survived worse." "Yes," she said softly. "I imagine you have." When the storm finally passed, they emerged to survey the damage. Much of their external work had been destroyed, but the main structure remained intact. "We'll need to start over with the expansion," Eli observed, picking up a twisted piece of metal that had once been part of a support frame. Lyra echoed, studying him with those gold-flecked eyes. "You speak as though you plan to stay." Eli met her gaze steadily. "Unless you're rescinding your offer." "No," she replied, and he could have sworn her scales flushed a deeper shade of blue. "The bond remains if you wish it." That evening, as they sat together planning the repairs, Eli found himself increasingly aware of her presence. The graceful way she moved, the subtle changes in her scale coloration that seemed to reflect her emotions. When their hands accidentally touched over the blueprint display, neither pulled away immediately. "Eli," she said, her voice carrying a new timbre, "what exactly do you understand about Crestian bonding rituals?" The question hung between them, opening a door to possibilities neither had fully acknowledged until now. Union of hearts, Eli leaned back from the blueprint display, considering Lyra's question with the same careful attention he'd once given to fleet tactical assessments. "Not much beyond the diplomatic basics," he admitted. "I know the bonding stone represents a formal alliance between individuals or houses. It's legally binding and respected across the shared systems." Lyra's scales rippled with a subtle pattern that Eli had begun to associate with amusement. "That's the political version taught to off-worlders. There's more to it." She rose gracefully and moved to a carved wooden chest in the corner of the room, one of the few personal items she'd brought from her homeworld. From it, she withdrew a small ceremonial box inlaid with iridescent shell. "The bond we created at Nexus Station was legal but incomplete," she explained, returning to sit closer to him than before. "A true Crestian bonding involves an exchange of essences." "That sounds intimate," Eli said, watching as she opened the box to reveal 2 small crystal vials and a ceremonial blade. "It is," she confirmed, her scales shifting to a deeper blue that extended down her neck. Under normal circumstances, bonded pairs would spend a full lunar cycle in preparation, learning each other's histories, sharing memories. She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Exploring compatibility." The implication hung in the air between them. Eli found himself studying her features, the elegant sweep of her scaled crest, the graceful lines of her neck, the expressive eyes that conveyed so much more than her measured words. "And you're suggesting we—" he began, uncertain how to phrase the question. "I'm suggesting we honor the commitment we've made if you wish to," Lyra said carefully. "Our circumstances are unusual, but the bond itself is real." Eli thought about the past weeks, how they'd worked side by side, gradually learning each other's rhythms and preferences, how she'd risked her position and sacrificed her heritage stone for his freedom, how he'd begun to anticipate the subtle movements of her tail that telegraphed her emotions. "I'd like to understand," he said finally, "if you're willing to teach me." That night, Lyra explained the Crestian bonding traditions, rituals dating back to the pre-space age when her ancestors first formed alliances between rival territories. The sharing of histories came first, and they talked long into the night. Eli spoke of his childhood on a terraforming colony, his years in Fleet Academy, the idealism that had driven him to investigate the corruption that eventually led to his downfall. Lyra shared stories of the competitive creche where she was raised, the pressure to uphold her clutch line's reputation, her gradual disillusionment with Crestian politics that led to her self-imposed exile. "We aren't so different," Eli observed as the moon's strange midnight glow filtered through the dome above them. "Both outsiders in our own worlds." "Perhaps that's why the universe brought us together," Lyra suggested, reaching tentatively to brush her fingers against his. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through Eli's body. He turned his hand to meet hers, his fingers interlacing with her slender, scaled ones. "Is this part of the ritual?" he asked softly. "This," Lyra said, moving closer until he could feel the warmth radiating from her scales, "is simply what I want." Their first kiss was an exploration, her lips cooler than a human's but surprisingly soft, the sensation alien yet exciting. Eli's hand moved to cup the side of her face, careful of the delicate scales along her jaw. Her arms encircled him, drawing him closer, the strength in her lithe form evident but controlled. When they parted, her scales had taken on a luminescent quality, glowing faintly in the dim light. "You're beautiful," Eli whispered, genuinely awed by the sight. "It's a reaction," she explained, a hint of self-consciousness in her voice. "When Crestians experience strong emotions, particularly desire." Eli traced the pattern of light across her shoulder, fascinated. "It's incredible." Their next kiss was deeper, less hesitant. Eli felt the gentle scrape of her claws against his back as she pulled him closer, her body molding against his with surprising compatibility despite their different anatomies. They moved to her sleeping chamber, where bioluminescent plants provided a soft blue glow. Piece by piece, they removed their garments, each revelation met with gentle exploration. Eli was captivated by the intricate patterns on her scales, the way they shifted and glowed beneath his touch. Lyra seemed equally fascinated by the texture of his skin, the definition of muscles beneath. "There are differences," she murmured, tracing a scar on his shoulder, "but the essentials are the same." Their joining was slow, careful, a discovery of what pleased each other, what harmonized between their species. The bioluminescence in Lyra's scales intensified with her pleasure, casting magical patterns across their entwined forms. Eli found himself completely lost in the experience, every sensation new and intensified. Afterward, they lay together in a comfortable silence, her head resting on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. "The exchange of essences," Lyra said finally, reaching for the ceremonial box she had placed beside the sleeping platform. "The final part of the bonding." She removed the crystal blade, its edge catching the light from her still glowing scales. With practiced precision, she made a small incision on her palm, then offered the blade to Eli. "A drop of blood from each," she explained, "mixed and preserved as a symbol of our union." Eli took the blade and mirrored her action, making a shallow cut across his palm. Lyra pressed their hands together, their blood mingling, then guided their joined hands over one of the crystal vials, allowing a single drop of their combined blood to fall inside. "With this essence, we are truly bonded," she said softly. "One life, one path, one shared future." As they sealed the vial, the habitat's communication system chimed with an incoming message, the first since their arrival. Lyra reluctantly pulled away to activate the receiver. A Crestian diplomatic code scrolled across the screen, followed by an urgent text-only warning. "Helix operatives have tracked your departure from Nexus. Contract issued for the Human. 3 vessels approaching Viridia system. Estimated arrival 26 hours. Exercise caution, Ambassador." "You are beyond official protection." Eli read the message over her shoulder, his body tensing. "They found us." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes reflecting determination rather than fear. "Yes. But they'll find us together." She reached for him, their freshly cut palms pressing together once more, a silent promise that transcended words or ritual. Defiance and devotion dawn broke over the Viridian moon with a stillness that belied the approaching danger. Eli stood at the edge of the settlement's perimeter, scanning the horizon with tactical binoculars. Behind him, Lyra was securing their most essential supplies and equipment. 22 hours remaining, she said, joining him at the boundary marker. Perhaps less if they've upgraded their drives since my intelligence report. Eli lowered the binoculars. We could run. Your ship has enough range to reach the Callisto Sanctuary. And spend our lives looking over our shoulders? Lyra's tail curved thoughtfully. No, this ends here. They spent the day transforming their home into a defensible position. Eli drew on years of security training, establishing choke points and fallback positions, while Lyra activated dormant systems in the habitat that revealed its dual nature, not just a scientific outpost, but a strategic retreat designed with defense in mind. You planned for something like this, Eli observed as she unlocked a hidden armory containing weapons of both human and Crestian design. I made enemies exposing corruption in the diplomatic corps, she explained, checking the charge on an energy staff. Caution becomes second nature. By nightfall, they had done all they could. The perimeter was secured with sensor mines. The habitat's defense shields were at maximum capacity, and emergency escape routes were prepared if retreat became necessary. They sat together at the highest point of the habitat dome, watching the stars with the knowledge that somewhere among them, hunters approached. Tell me about Earth, Lyra said suddenly. Your ancestral home, Eli smiled faintly. I've never actually been there. Third-generation colonist. But my grandmother used to tell stories about the Pacific Ocean, how it stretched beyond the horizon like the universe itself. We should go someday, Lyra said, her scales glowing softly in the darkness. When this is over. I'd like that. Eli reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. There's a traditional human custom I'd like to share with you if you're willing. Lyra turned to him curiously. What sort of custom? Eli reached into his pocket and produced a simple band fashioned from salvaged metal, similar to the one she had given him at Nexus Station, but designed to fit her more slender digit. On Earth, married couples exchange rings as symbols of their commitment, he explained. I made this yesterday while you were calibrating the defense grid. Lyra's eyes widened as he slipped the band onto her finger. It caught the light from her scales, the polished surface reflecting their glow. It's beautiful, she whispered. Not as elegant as Crestian craftwork, Eli said apologetically. But she silenced him with a kiss, her arms wrapping around him with fierce tenderness. It's perfect, she assured him when they finally parted. The habitat alert system chimed softly, interrupting their moment. Eli checked the readout and his expression hardened. They've entered the moon's orbit. 3 vessels, military grade. Scan suggests 12 to 15 personnel. Earlier than expected, Lyra said, rising smoothly to her feet. They must have pushed their engines beyond safety parameters. They moved with practiced efficiency to their designated positions. The long hours of preparation had forged them into a unit that communicated with minimal words. A glance, a gesture, a nod conveying all that was needed. The first ship landed at the edge of the safe zone, just beyond their perimeter sensors. Through the surveillance feed, they watched as 6 figures emerged, humans in tactical gear bearing the subtle insignia of Helix Corporation's private security force. They're being cautious, Eli noted. Testing our defenses. Lyra activated the communication system. This is Ambassador Lyra Nix of the Crestian Dominion. You are trespassing on sovereign territory. Withdraw immediately. The response came quickly, a man's voice, cold and professional. Ambassador, this is Director Mercer of Helix Security. We have no quarrel with you. Surrender the fugitive Eli Blackwood and we'll depart peacefully. Former Captain Blackwood is my bonded mate under Crestian law, Lyra replied. Any action against him is an action against me, and by extension, the Dominion itself. A pause, then. The Dominion has officially denied any knowledge of your activities, Ambassador. You stand alone. Lyra's eyes met Eli's, a silent message passing between them. He nodded, moving to a secondary control panel. Then we make our stand together. Lyra said into the communicator before cutting the transmission. The attack came from multiple directions at once, a calculated assault designed to overwhelm their defenses. The perimeter mines detonated in sequence as mercenaries approached, but several made it through the outer barrier. Eli activated the habitat's defensive countermeasures, stunning those closest to the structure, while Lyra monitored the remaining ships in orbit. "There, deploying something," she warned, enhancing the sensor feed. "Some kind of acoustic disruptor." The device hit the ground with a dull thud, then emitted a high-frequency pulse that shattered their communication array and disrupted the habitat's power grid. Emergency systems kicked in, but the defense shield flickered ominously. "They're trying to disable rather than destroy," Eli realized. "They want us alive." "For questioning," Lyra agreed grimly. Or worse. As the mercenaries regrouped for another assault, Lyra moved to Eli's side. "There's something I haven't shown you," she said quickly. "A Crestian ability considered primitive by modern standards." Her scales began to glow more intensely, and Eli felt a change in the air around them, a static charge that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. "My ancestral line retained the elemental affinity," she explained. "With the bonding complete, I can channel it fully." She stepped onto the habitat's external platform, her form radiating blue-white energy that crackled between her outstretched hands. The approaching mercenaries hesitated, weapons raised. "Last warning!" Lyra called out, her voice carrying unnaturally across the distance. "Leave this moon or face the consequences." Director Mercer's voice came through a portable amplifier. "Stand down, Ambassador. We have planetary bombardment capabilities if necessary." Lyra's answer was not words, but action. She thrust her hands forward, and lightning erupted from her fingertips, arcing across the clearing to strike the acoustic disruptor, which exploded in a shower of sparks. The mercenaries scattered, diving for cover. Eli seized the moment, activating the habitat's secondary defense protocol. The ground beneath the attackers' ships liquefied as hidden terraforming equipment reversed its function, creating a quicksand-like effect that began to swallow their vessels. Panicked shouts filled the air as the mercenaries realized their retreat was being cut off. Several fired wildly at the habitat, their shots absorbed by the now stabilized shield. "Enough!" Lyra's voice boomed across the battlefield, her form still crackling with energy. "Your ships are disabled, your position compromised. Surrender, and you may yet leave this moon alive." A tense standoff followed, broken when one of the mercenaries threw down his weapon and raised his hands. Others slowly followed suit. Director Mercer was the last to surrender. His face twisted with rage as Eli and Lyra approached, she still glowing with residual energy, he covering her with a Crestian pulse rifle. "This changes nothing," Mercer spat. "Helix has resources beyond your imagination." "Perhaps," Eli said calmly, "but they'll have to find new leadership." He held up a data crystal. "This contains all the evidence I gathered about Helix's weapons smuggling operation, including the names of everyone involved. It's been transmitted to both Fleet Command and the Crestian Intelligence Network." "Impossible," Mercer snarled. "All copies were destroyed, except the one I memorized and reconstructed during my time here," Eli replied. "Amazing what a clear conscience and supportive partner can help you accomplish." As the defeated mercenaries were secured, Lyra's energy field gradually subsided, leaving her leaning against Eli for support. "That was impressive," he said softly, helping her back toward the habitat. "Ancient Crestian battle bonding," she explained wearily. "Rarely seen these days. Takes a significant toll." "Worth it," Eli said with a smile. Looking back at their captives, dawn broke once more over the settlement. But this time it brought the arrival of a Crestian diplomatic vessel responding to Lyra's emergency beacon. The mercenaries were transferred to its brig, and Eli's evidence was formally registered with both human and Crestian authorities. As the diplomatic ship prepared to depart, its captain approached them. "Ambassador Nix, the Dominion Council requests your immediate return to explain your unconventional actions." Lyra's hand found Eli's, their fingers intertwining naturally now. Inform the council that Ambassador Nix and her bonded mate will present themselves at their convenience, after repairs to our settlement are complete. The captain looked between them, taking in their united stance and the matching bands on their fingers. As you wish, Ambassador. Safe journeys to you both. Later, as they stood watching the ships depart, enemies and allies alike vanishing into the atmosphere, Eli pulled Lyra close. "What now?" he asked, his voice containing all the unspoken questions about their future. Lyra looked out over the settlement, damaged but standing, much like themselves. "Now," she said, turning to face him fully, "we build something new, together."